Alrighty, we also have another report,
Right.
Manager?
We have a presentation this morning based upon some comments that Council made last week about the Bicentennial Park. We've got a presentation this morning. Eric Winger is going to kick that off. And if you recall, there was some questions about a month ago when I went through the DDRC. Councilman Shadid prompted some discussion. Others brought up questions about the park last week. Subsequent to last week, it did go through the Downtown Design Review Committee and was approved by that body last Thursday. The plan is to make a presentation here today just to present information, not to take any action today. It will be followed by an action item tomorrow with the Economic Development Trust, and then brought back a week from today to this body, to the City Council, for action on the contract award of this project. And so with that, Mr. Winger.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Appreciate the opportunity, and I think as I introduce the presentation that we have this morning for you, a lot of the information that you are seeing has actually been in some planning documents. It's been in the actual final plans, but it's not been publicly presented until several weeks ago when we first went to the DDRC in January. This is a background really of the project that we wanted to bring to you and to make sure that you understand that there was a process that has been followed. And this project actually began clear back in August of 2010. It was actually a project that was listed in the implementation agreement with Devon, and it was approved even earlier the year before. So this is a Project 180 project that's been planned for some time. Plan was presented to and recommended. This preliminary report was last spring in March and in May. There were presentations made to two of the groups at that time, but for the City Council, it was just included in your packets and there was not a formal presentation made, which is again why we're here today, to make sure that you have all the information before you. We were working very closely with the architect and with the community. There's also been a lot of coordination with the Arts Commission. One of the items that you'll find in the presentation is there's a lot of historic markers, there's monuments, and there's some art that's in the current Bicentennial Park that needs to be relocated, needs to be salvaged and maintained and preserved. And so there has been a significant survey done, one that's actually got photos of every one of those items. They've been cataloged, and that went to the Arts Commission to ensure that they were knowledgeable and were prepared to actually start those relocations. That was approved last October in 2011. The final plans were approved in December. One of the questions that we received over the past few weeks is why we actually completed the plans early without actually having all the approvals in place. As many of you know, later this year in 2012 is the 75th anniversary of the Civic Center Music Hall. And this park is obviously a key element of that facility. So one of the goals was to align that construction schedule with that grand reopening. And so had we not advanced the plans last year, there would not have been an opportunity to complete the work by that time. And so we did move forward with the bidding of the project. The project was bid and bids were received. The contract has not been approved, and as City Manager mentioned, that is what's going to be on your agenda next week for consideration. We have successfully completed our DDRC review and recommendation. There was a unanimous recommendation from the DDRC just a couple of weeks ago to move this project forward. There is a construction contract that is scheduled for the Economic Development Trust tomorrow for their consideration, and then again we will be back next Tuesday with that contract for your consideration as well. But with that, we do have the presentation for you today. If we'll move to the next slide, I want to introduce to you that there was a citizen process, there was a stakeholder process that was included. This was a process very similar to the Myriad Botanical Gardens process, where there was a number of individuals from different agencies that were involved, and there was a total of 9 steering committee meetings. Next slide, please. And this is a list of a lot of those members. And you'll see if you'll look at some of the representations that they have. We've got city staff, of course, but we also have Civic Center Music Hall, OKC Museum of Art, Chamber of Commerce, Leadership OKC, the Arts Commission, and others. And I think that through our discussions we found that there probably could have been more participation. And I think a couple of the things that we've learned is as we work through the process, that were things that we might like to have changed over the past year to just make sure that there was more awareness of the Bicentennial Project. But at this time, we want to present to you the history, the design itself, to be able to answer some questions. And so I want to invite Jim Crosby with PDG up to the podium. They are the lead architect for the Bicentennial Park, and of course staff will also be available for questions afterwards.
Thank you, Eric. My name is Jim Crosby from Planning Design Group. I appreciate Mayor and Council that giving us the opportunity to go over the plans with you and try and get you familiar with this and be able to answer questions and comments when we're complete. Randy Elliott is here. He is a member of the team as well, strong member of the team, and Randall helped me with the presentation and be here for comments as well. I'll kind of get it started, and I've been known to ramble on, so I'm going to try and put it in high gear here and go through this so that we have plenty of time before we run out of time so that council members can ask questions and we can comment on those specific questions. This was kind of just one of our inspirational slides. This is obviously the original concept from 1930. This was completed by Hare & Hare out of Kansas City. This shows the municipal complex with the Civic Center to the top of the page to the west. Bicentennial Park, which was known as Civic Center Park originally in the center, City Hall, and then the courthouse to the east. You might go back to that real quick, Mike, just pointing out a couple of the key elements. Trying to get a pointer here. But obviously you see the grand lawn. What we've tried to do is be respectful to this design and keep the historic integrity of the plan in place. We have preserved that grand lawn, which has been there since its inception. It's there currently today, and we want to renovate that grand lawn and bring it up to a higher standard of turf and maintenance to it. We continue to keep the trees along the perimeter on the north and south. The sweeping lines, we've kind of, in our design, you'll see sweeping lines. We were kind of inspired by the sweeping lines that were on that original plan that never got constructed in the 1930s there, but we were intrigued by those sweeping lines, and today we're not considering the City Hall project anymore from the funding standpoint and design standpoint. We're only here to kind of go over Bicentennial Park, but Civic Center was in our original plans, and so it did encompass everything on the Civic Center and City Hall grounds. Some of the elements that kind of inspired us is the Art Deco motif that you'll see on a lot of the buildings. All of the buildings, as a matter of fact, have this aluminum architectural millwork that you'll see in the windows and in the prominent locations on the buildings. You'll see kind of a overwhelming idea of a central axis with sweeping lines. We picked this up. You see it in different forms here on the different work. This one in particular was very inspiring to us. You see kind of, if you look at it from this angle, a central axis, and then the sweeping lines from each direction sweeping into the center of, in our case, the park. So this was very inspirational in our concept to create the Art Deco style design and pick up that flavor of the 1930s. Here you'll see the master plan in a plan view, and I'm going to spend most of the time right here kind of explaining so I can point to the different areas and things, and then we'll go through a series of caricature sketches where you can kind of see what it would look like from ground level and from aerial views from different locations in the park. Obviously, you can see from stairs to stairs there's a dominant central axis. The sweeping lines that I was referring to on a lot of the architectural millwork sweeping right into the center of the Civic Center. Also, that brings you into the center of the park. Currently, the park has walls and it has limited access into the park. In the current design, you'll have access at the corners and a primary access in the center. But there's concrete walls and impediments that go through both areas on all four sides, north and south, that keep you from entering into the park. And so in our discussions, a lot of the members, we felt like that the park design currently tried to keep you out onto the perimeters, whether you're going to the Civic Center or just down the streets east to west, that you really didn't feel like you wanted to sweep into the heart of the park and the center of the park. And so, again, the sweeping lines provided several things. It provided that good pedestrian access right into the middle of the park. It provides great access for the Civic Center when they're having functions. This plan also illustrates the new streetscape that's under construction as it'll look when it's complete. The 45-degree parking and the increased number of parking spaces out there. So, you know, in events in the Civic Center, you'll have a lot of parking on these perimeters, and this is going to bring you, opposed to walking down the sides and staying out on the perimeter with the cars. We want to bring the people into the center of the park And also there's a couple reasons for that. There's the option for Jim Brown, and he's talked extensively about the redesign and had his input so that we can create spaces for Jim Brown to have, in the Civic Center, to have pre-event functions, which can occur in these plazas down here. The sweeping lines also, though, before I get down to that end, what they do is part of the charge was that we were to create an area where future sculptures and possibly mobile art shows could stage. So with this design, we felt like this worked very well with the sculpture and the art possibilities by creating these rooms or like galleries that you'd see in an art museum. So we have places where sculptures, art, and things can be put into these different rooms or galleries and displayed, whether that be permanent art, whether it be the pieces that are in the park now and that the Art Commission recommends them to come back. We have places that we can house those, as well as possibilities of traveling art shows that come to the Art Museum that could stage on the grounds here. We have several plazas down at this end. We have a North Plaza and a South Plaza that mirror. Obviously, you can see the design is very symmetrical. What's on the north is on the south. So we have the plazas on the north and south down adjacent to the Civic Center. We have what we call a fountain stage in this area. We've worked with the Planning Department and DDRC on making some revisions to that. This presentation today shows those revisions as they approved those in the meeting last week. Great gathering areas in this area. We've also, on the drive, one of the things we did is there's bollards all along that drive now. We've removed those bollards and gone back in with just a traditional traffic control of a curb, much less obtrusive, and wanted to keep a low profile there. So we went back in with a curve that flushes out in this pedestrian area. This pedestrian area is about 80 feet across for the drop-off and kind of a vehicular as well as pedestrian plaza with our special paving in there. Kind of backing up a step, we have the bookends here of the Civic Center to City Hall. We have the plaza that exists out in front of City Hall now, so as you can see, we brought that across Walker to make the connection into the park there with a strong connection, and you can see bringing that across there. What we've done is, in this central corridor, there's nothing over 12 inches tall in there. There was a little bit of misconception on our fountain stage originally that was a tall item that would be like a theatrical stage and be 36 inches or 40 inches tall or something, but it's only 12 inches tall, just enough to give a little bit of an area for the performance to feel like they have a stage. We've relocated the fountain down onto the grade with some safety concerns, so that fountain will be on grade, and again the stage, which will remain back in this back half of the area, will be elevated 12 inches only. The fountain is a fountain that's programmed. It has programs where the fountain can come on and do different spray arrangements, and it can also be programmed to some songs. So there'll be some songs that would be selected, and those could be, in theme to something that might be going on in the Civic Center or something maybe a little more lively for a Saturday afternoon. It'll be a programmable fountain with the wind in Oklahoma City being a problem. We have a wind control on the fountain so that it's a variable speed. We can set that to a multitude of different wind speeds that it's not either on or off, but it'll throttle the fountain down. So if on a normal day it's spraying 12 feet in the air and the wind starts to pick up, it might throttle down to 50% where it's only spraying 6 feet in the air, and then it can throttle down to a lower level, but then also we'll have it set so that when it hits a certain speed, it'll turn itself off so that we're not spraying water all over the park. On the north perimeter up here, the park is not, if everything looks a little crooked, I don't know if it was the surveying back in the day, but everything's not perfectly square. We've squared up the park and made it symmetrical, but in doing that, it left about 10 or 12 feet in addition on this north side. So in conjunction with the streetscape, we've added about 10 foot of sidewalk and a second row of trees, and then we've added some game tables up in that area, which is closer to the residential area. We hope, from a standpoint that this can kind of be adopted by the residents to the north as like a neighborhood park. I heard a comment about neighborhood parks. Obviously, this is a municipal park, municipal grounds, and this is in the downtown area. But now with the residential happening to the north, they can use this as if it was a neighborhood park as well. Walk the dog, go on a picnic, throw the frisbee, any of those type of things. As I go through here, I'm sure I'm going quickly and I'm forgetting some things. I'm going to let Rand come up and he's probably listening back there on catching what I've missed and some history of, Rand is great with the history. There's the history of the railroad, and I'll let Rand talk about that, the history, of the buildings and the WPA and all that, and Rand's great on talking about that. One other thing I'll notice here, in clearing this entire corridor of anything of over 12 inches, we've also relocated the banner poles that serve as advertising or for the events and things for the Civic Center. They've been pulled to the sides a little bit more so that they are visible when you come in the entry roads, but they don't block the front of the museum. And then as well, our signs, we have 2 signs with Walker going to 2-way traffic. We have a sign to the north and a sign to the south. That was something that was modified again in the comments and conversation with DDRC, and we were out of compliance with the sign ordinance a little bit, so we have made revisions so that we meet the sign ordinance there. Rand, why don't you come up and hit some highlights on what I passed.
Give him a minute to collect his breath. My name is Rand Elliott. I live at 425 Northwest 15th. First off, we've had a fabulous experience, and we appreciate the opportunity and the support of the city on working on such an important project. A couple of things that are, I think you might enjoy. Jim alluded to the fact of the history. If you were to look at some early Sanborn maps of downtown Oklahoma City actually stopped at Walker. And there's a wonderful note on the drawing that says farmland on the left of Walker, and so that's a wonderful historic document. The other part is that the black lines in the paving actually represent and are a part of the notion of embedding history into this park. And this was the train yard is what this was. And there's a fabulous photograph showing a train building just north of the Skirvin. And this photograph shows everybody excited and happy about this. Well, if you look more carefully into the history of it, they weren't excited about something happening. They were excited that the building was about to be torn down and that what the community called the Iron Wall was about to be erased, which was the railroad tracks going through east to west in downtown. Knowing that that is an important piece of history, this notion of embedding history into the plan has been a very important part of our project. And so the black lines and these linear elements literally suggest what history might have been. Jim's touched on the other things that I think are really important here, and it truly is inspired by the Art Deco architecture and flavor and spirit of what we have in this very important piece. This axial connection, this linear connection east to west has been very important to continue that relationship between two buildings. And as Jim mentioned, the notions of using Civic Center and City Hall as bookends is really important. We're going to actually do floodlighting on both buildings, and so if you were in the park, you could look left or look right and see those important historic buildings in each location. There's also been discussion about what do. You don't just open a park and expect people to come and participate. And throughout our year plus of discussion and planning, there's lots of thought about how do we get this activated, how do we activate this park. And it's gone from everything from we would engage the Legacy Apartments next door to come and adopt this as their personal park, if you will. All sorts of program issues like that have been discussed, but one very important one was to try to create an event that might become a signature event for this particular park. And an example for that has come up was the notion of maybe there's a food festival, something along those lines that could be a part of making this park an identifiable centerpiece for downtown. So I think I just added, did a little cleanup there for Jim, and we're certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yeah, sure. You want to talk about
kind of the character sketches? This as well is a picture as it stands now from Google Earth, so you can see the park as it is now. Grand Lawn, we preserved the Grand Lawn. This would be a view from Walker, looking, on the plaza at City Hall, looking back to the Civic Center. You can see that down through that corridor there's nothing of any height, and that it opens a clear view from east to west, both directions. Our sweeping walls, I forgot to mention, those are granite walls that are 30 inches high, and the soil behind those berms up to create some movement. In our meetings, that kind of, our discussion was it kind of represents the rolling terrain of Oklahoma and the sweeping plains, and so as flat as the site is, we thought it was interesting to introduce a little bit of movement with the ground there. Another picture of the Grand Lawn. You can see that it just looks a little tired right there. We'll have all new lawn. Maintenance was kind of as a question that's come up. Just real briefly, we have worked extensively with the Park Department on maintenance. We're going to install all new irrigation system, all new electrical system, new plumbing, sewer connections, water connections that are required for the fountain and for the irrigation. There's another aerial view looking back from the northwest to the southeast. You can see the plazas, the fountain in the foreground, the lawn, the trees. With the trees there now, they've been planted real close over the years, and some of them, they look good as a mass, but as an individual tree, they were kind of planted close together. We've spaced the trees appropriately so they'll have room to grow and mature as they're intended.
One thing that's, I think, pretty interesting to note here is that in our conversations with Jim Brown, he said we have 350,000 people a year that use the Hall of Mirrors in the Civic Center. And this view, if you went back, Michael, if you were to see this view, there's a great number of people that enjoy this view for events at the Civic Center itself.
While you're talking about the trees, because this is one of the items that I've had a lot of people contact me on, I'm asking a question I know the answer to because I got the information yesterday, but I think the public ought to be aware of an arborist was engaged in this process and was utilized to study the trees, study whether any of them were salvageable, what was the best trees to put in there, so forth?
Yes, sir, it was. We did engage an arborist, and with part of the evaluation is with the extensiveness of the renovation of the park, removal of all the hardscape and everything, and then all new infrastructure put in. As you can see, and there'll be a slide or two that come up with the streetscape construction, you can see how intense the construction is. And with all new infrastructure and everything, this site's going to be really the trees would be really stressed to do all the digging and compaction and everything here. And as a group, and as a landscape architect, I'm all about trees. And it was just decided as a group that, this project would be too hard to work around those trees with everything that we're going to do in the renovation, and that the effort that went into some of the trees at Myriad Garden to move those big trees and spend $25,000 on a tree, and now it's become a big chore, and the success rate of that, I'm not saying they're all dying by any means, but it has been a struggle. We've talked with the park department on how they have to try and maintain those trees, and they're losing some of those trees, and it's a big expense. We did identify 10 or 12 trees that we thought the arborist thought would be appropriate to move, and we did have a bid item in our bid package for that. And we did have money budgeted for that. It was decided that with the high cost of maintenance and the problems that they've been having at Myriad Gardens, that was struck from the bid package. It could be added back in, I think. We've talked about that just in recent days. And if the contract is approved next week, there's still time to do that while those trees are dormant, and to move 10 or 12 of those trees.
The size of the new trees coming in?
Yeah, the size of the new trees, they're not going to be small trees like you'd see on the streetscape. In Myriad Garden, there were several areas where they did incorporate large trees, but these will be 6-inch caliper trees. They'll be 22 to 24 foot tall. They'll be of a variety that's consistent with streetscape and what's going on with downtown, so that we all tie in. And then I personally will go with the contractor that's going to install these trees to Georgia and hand tag these trees. Yes, sir.
Larry?
Well, yeah, thank you, Mayor. I also have had several comments about the trees. If an individual, evidently there's one tree there, Rand, and I don't know which one it is, was planted in like 1937. If an individual citizen has some number of trees that they really are attached to, is there any way that they can get information about whether those are candidates of that number of trees that might be relocated? Is there any way that they could find out?
Yes, we have a plan that was included in our construction documents that identified those trees that we scheduled to remove. They are, I'm sure, would not be the tree that would have been planted in 1937, because that would be a tree that would, I would speculate, be huge. And the trees that are kind of down the center corridor there are some oaks primarily that are in the 10 to 13 inch caliper range, which is a significant tree. Were the ones that were identified to be able to be moved with a 110-inch tree spade.
Larry, one thing that is important to note is that the park that's there today is a 1970s park. And so much of the landscaping, we believe, was added and changed in the 1970s.
As well, there was a modification in the 50s from our research, too. So there was a modification in the 50s, 76, basically, with the Bicentennial Park, and then again in early 2000s.
But I think one of the comments that came from your conversation with Councilman Mars, the arborist who was involved, serious look was made of the trees, and it was not just a capricious decision that they're gone. It was a lot of logic behind there that from an architectural standpoint and from a tree health standpoint, et cetera, and maintenance in the future.
Yes. Another thing that the arborist pointed out, and he was the same arborist that did work on he was one of the arborists that did work on the Myriad Gardens, and so he was familiar with relocating the large trees within the Oklahoma City and the park system. But another thing, you know, I kind of alluded to those trees. Some of those trees are planted. I didn't physically measure them. We do have them on a survey, and I could, but they're 15 or 20 feet apart, where it's an oak tree that might have a canopy at its mature size of 40 or 50 feet. So they've all grown together. So, you know, another one of the concerns of the committee as well as the arborist was that if you go and remove the smaller, less desirable trees around and that larger trees there, that by the time you remove the other ones, it's going to be one-sided, and it's going to, you know, the side that grew into the other trees and didn't have any sun is not going to have a branch structure, so it's going to, you know, it's just going to deteriorate, and the health of them is just going to deteriorate greatly with as much work as we're going to do in there is done. Now, on the other hand, which is not under the consideration here, but on the City Hall side, where we were doing much less infrastructure, it has a new irrigation system. We weren't doing all the electrical work. We were able to save most of the trees on that side of the project, and you know that's not under consideration today, but just FYI, as far as you know, the different circumstances between the two sides of the project.
Any other questions?
So,
yes.
Rand and John, as it is now, the plan is to remove all the trees that are presently there. Is that right?
That is correct. In the main body of the park, the trees that are up around the Civic Center proper will remain, and Jim Brown requested that we leave for sure the round planters, which remain, and they have some trees planted in them that flank the north and the south sides of the steps, but the trees that are up adjacent to the building all remain.
Okay. And the statutes, is there any consideration for any of the statutes to remain in the park with the new design? I noticed that, you know, I guess where it looked like some of the planners were that on the open area, was there any consideration for the traffic as you open up the park, where you're taking people off the sidewalk into the middle of the park, that any of the statutes could be situated in some of those areas where there would be open sight to the walking traffic?
I'll say something and then you can add to that, Rand. But yes, in our committee meetings, you know, we had extensive conversations about all the sculptures and the items that are there, the plaques and everything. And so What the committee felt was the best thing to do was for that to go to the Arts Council for recommendations on whether they thought that those pieces should come back to the park. The park department is actually, and Eric can speak about this because he's got a preliminary report from the park department on some of their ideas that they have for those. Some of those can come back to the park. They would be able to be staged in these open areas between the sweeps, I think, if that's appropriate. We felt like it was important for the Art Council to be able to have a say in whether it was appropriate. And again, I'll let Eric talk about this, but where these pieces might go. But if they feel that the historical significance is that they belong in this park, yes, we can find a home for them in the park, and we have created the park to be able to include sculpture, whether it be those existing pieces or new pieces.
Skip, that was a real important part of the actual RFP from the city was to renovate the park and to be able to allow it to accept sculpture. And so we've been real sensitive to that, and there are a number of ways that those works could be relocated elsewhere or used here. I mean, there's a plan for consideration. We documented each and every one of those pieces of art. Some are plaques, some are sculpture. All of that is documented in our drawings.
Gary?
To just fill in just a minute of the current plan, the Parks Department's been working very diligently to make sure that all the items, of course, have been cataloged. And as I mentioned, the Arts Commission has already agreed to assist in that overall process. There's 4 major elements that have already come under discussion, and let me just update you briefly on those. The Wiley Post statue is one of the major items that is there, and there's obviously the pending renovations at Wiley Post Park. That's a part of our 2007 bond issue. There's nearly a $9 million renovation of that park that's underway or soon to be underway, and it may choose to be one of the better homes for the Wiley Post statue. The Thomas Stafford statue, again, there is some renovations, and as you may have seen in the newspaper yesterday, the Stars and Stripes Park, the return of the Rocket Playground and the capsule and some of those things that are being returned to that park. There was some consideration and some discussion that Thomas Stafford may better be suited there, but again, these decisions have not been made. These are all that would be going back to the Arts Council, Arts Commission for consideration.
And as they make those deliberations, a option, as Randy Elliott pointed out, is back in Bicentennial Park. I mean, there's just an opportunity to review and look at all the pieces and say, where is the best place? Where's the best fit? And where's the best place for the public to enjoy these?
And it's exactly where we're headed with Stanley Draper and also the Bicentennial Monument. I think those are probably the 2 that have also had the most discussion. Obviously, Draper's had a lot of history with the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce. There's been discussions regarding their facilities. And then the Bicentennial Monument, Mr. Woods came to City Council last week. He also came to the DDRC meeting and personally preferred that be relocated back to this park. So whether it's the Bicentennial Monument or some of the other figures or statues or markers, there's also 2 time capsules that will be relocated, and the Maestro is actually included in the plans to come back with the construction. So there is already intent to bring some of the art pieces back, and I think we'll work closely with Parks to ensure that the others are safely relocated as well.
Any other comments or questions for the design team?
May I just make a quick comment, Mayor, if
Sure.
it's okay? I just wanted to share how much I appreciate everybody coming and the time that you've spent to educate us on this process. I think we discovered a week ago that we probably had a failure in process, and so it's been tremendously helpful, I think, certainly to me and to the rest of my colleagues to have an opportunity to see this. And personally, I'm extremely excited about creating what looks like a new living room, in a sense, to the Civic Center and the Art Museum, and a space that, as a downtown resident, will really be able to enjoy. So thank you for the energy and time that went into creating this design, and I think we're all going to be very pleased with it.
All right. Yeah, Pete?
I have a couple comments. Some of them don't have anything to do with this part of it, but as I look at the list of people that were on the committee, I mean, I'm struck by the fact of the lack of diversity of that group. I didn't see a name on there that I recognized from South Oklahoma City, not one. I didn't see a name that I saw on there that I thought might represent the other ethnic groups in Oklahoma City. I've asked some people to look at the list for me, and they assure me there's no one on that list like that. I'm troubled by that to start out with. This is a major project. Oklahoma City doesn't look like me, It looks like a lot of different people. And the idea that just people that look like me get to decide is difficult, I think. That's just an over comment, doesn't have anything to do with the design at all, just has to do with the process. I think I'm also troubled by the fact there wasn't really an HP person on there. There may be some people that have a historical preservation bend, but the historical significance of what's gone on in that park and the placement of those monuments and plaques have historical significance. They were put there for a reason, and I think the reason is that at the time they were put there, that park represented the central park in Oklahoma City, so I think people put them there for a specific reason. The idea that we're going to put them in a box somewhere and then decide later, I find that troubling. I think if we weren't in such a hurry, we could have done that all at one time. And that, which leads me to another concern I have, which is how did the priorities get established that this became such a rush job, and things like the acquisition and the change that is necessary on Santa Fe, on E.K. Gaylord, get shoved off because we didn't have the money. But this became just this is just an absolute rush. This is a huge priority for us, but something that's going to facilitate the construction of the railroad hub is not a priority. We're going to just talk about that later. Now, maybe I was asleep the day that those decisions were made about the priorities, but I don't remember any discussion about them at all. I'm not satisfied with the concern about the trees, but that train appears to have left the station with regard to the trees. I am concerned that we are putting two signs at a time when the city's policy has been to kind of restrict those signs. I don't know why one sign with two sides on it wouldn't work just as well as two signs do. I think it's a little bit disingenuous to show pictures of the old park with the grass brown and show pictures of the new park with them painted green and say one of them's tired and the other one's not. I mean, it seems to me if you're going to do apples to apples, you'd show them both at their best rather than one of them at its worst and the other one at its best. But that's, again, that train's left the station obviously also. I think I'm disappointed in the process. I'm not, the design, it's like a lot of choices we make in life. I mean, what's beautiful to somebody may not be beautiful to somebody else. What's fitting for someone may not be fitting to somebody else. And so I'm not going to get into that part of it. But I think the process itself is flawed. And this is not the first process in this whole thing that's gone on. This is not the first little piece of that process that I felt like was flawed. And I'm really not talking to the right people. You guys are not part of that, and I'm not talking to you. But I think this is an opportunity to say it. There's a number of artwork, pieces of artwork around the city in lots of different places. And it seems to me that if we're going to do this major renovation and relocation of historical art, like a statue is, we could have been much broader and made decisions, because this park could hold some of those things that are located at other places. I think the speed has dictated a lack of what I consider sensitivity to some of these things, and that's not. None of you had any control over that, and none of you have any control over that. So that's not a question or a comment directed at you. But when I see things like I have a copy of the book, the inventory, I have a copy of it, and I look at those things in that book, and I know that there a lot of emotion, a lot of sentiment was involved when those things were located there. But because we don't have time to do it, we're going to dig them up, put them in a box, and then wait to decide. And I'm not so sure that they're going to get the attention they would have received had we had the time to look at all of them and say, okay, this is what we're going to do with this, before we decided to clear the deck and put them in a box. We'll see. I mean, I've watched with some pain the architectural antiques, if you will, or the architectural artifacts of what happened to downtown Oklahoma City when we tore it up. We're located over in what we call Ford Park now. There's been so little care taken of those. They're almost all of them are beyond reclamation now. You'd almost have to reproduce them as opposed to reclaim those things. And I think I'm afraid that that's what will happen when we put all these things in this box or this closet or this room somewhere where they're just going to be laying there waiting for somebody to decide what happens. I'm afraid the same thing that happened to those architectural artifacts that are in Ford Park is going to happen to those things. And I just think a sense of history with more time would have produced a better result over the long run. And with regard to the location of the art, the design is the design. You either like it or you don't like it, and that's not. I'm not here to umpire. I'm not a judge for that kind of thing. But those artifacts are important. They were really important to somebody, to the mothers of the boys that died in World War II that put that piece over there. That was a big deal. Just because we don't have a citizenry now that remembers there ever was World War II doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Doesn't mean that those aren't important to the history of this city. I'm just a little troubled by the fact that I believe the speed dictated some decisions or some no decisions that we may regret. I watched that happen as a young man. You know that had to be a hell of a long time ago. But I watched that happen as a young man in downtown Oklahoma City when the decision was made to tear it up. And watched now, fortunately I've lived long enough to see us rebuild it. But everybody said, we'll have a plan that'll work, it'll work. Well, it's only started working like 40 years later. And I'm afraid I won't live to see the bicentennial statuary move back into the park, or Stanley Draper's statue given its. It doesn't need to be in front of the Chamber of Commerce. Stanley Draper was probably the leading person. I'm being redundant because I said this last week, but that's part of the deal. When I get the microphone, I get to talk. But he was a leader in Oklahoma City. He was not just a Chamber of Commerce guy. He was much bigger in the history of Oklahoma City than just a Chamber of Commerce guy. And so to say, we'll stick him in front of the Chamber of Commerce, or we'll put Wally Post down at Wally Post Park. I'm telling you, the people that use Wally Post Park don't know who Wally Post was. It's not going to make any difference to them. It's kind of a sop to me because now I represent that area. But those people that use that park don't know who Wally Post is. I mean, and he is not a historical figure in the sense of the users of Wally Post Park today. He's a historical figure in the sense of all of Oklahoma. And I just think more sensitivity could be used. The signs, I think that's a big mistake for us to put 2 signs in there when we're talking about visual clutter in other parts of town. I don't know why that doesn't apply to us. So those are just my thoughts.
Councilman, well, I just said a couple of comments. I know I understand a lot of your comments. I'm not going to respond to all those comments. 2 things in particular. One is about the signs. The chairman of the Planning Commission called me up a couple of weeks ago and said, I've got a real problem with us not following our own rules. You've got to go to the Board of Adjustment on some of those, and he goes, you've got to claim hardship. And he said, the city needs to follow its own rules. That's not right. I took him to heart. I went back to staff, to Eric, and said, what can we do to make sure that we don't do that? Now, whether you agree that there should be 1 sign or 2 signs, the signs do follow and do not have to go to the Board of Adjustment. So we did make some. We did follow the rules on that. And secondly, on the art, I will promise you that we'll go and you can have input into it. The council can all have input. The Arts Commission can have into it. And we will not do this in a slow track. We will go. We're not going to rush through it, but we'll be judicious and make sure that they are relocated and that all are happy, or there's at least a consensus. All's happy might be an overstatement, but there's a consensus, and we'll do it quick. We'll do it in a time.
I guess I would ask this: that the same sense of urgency to relocate those be adopted that there has been to dig them up and put them in a box someplace. That's my concern.
And I will commit to you that we will do that in a judicious manner.
All right. Yeah, Gary?
Well, just just a comment because I'm the one that got on my soapbox last week, but and I've certainly received the comments, good and bad, for that. But I will say this: I'm a lot more comfortable with what's being presented today than I was last week. And I think if I'd had a lot of this information last week, it wouldn't have necessitated my comments like it did. And I think that's a lesson that we've all talked about over the last few days. But I think that the if nothing else, I hope we've learned that there's a whole bunch of people out there in the community that aren't put on these committees, that aren't put on task forces, that don't have a way to communicate some of these, but they do still care about what goes on down here, and they care a lot about what we spend a lot of this money on. So I think the more judicious we are in presenting things as many times as we can and getting that information out there and making sure that they have a chance to come back and voice their opinion, I think the better off we're going to be. But I'll go back to the fact that I'm a lot more inclined to be supportive of this now than I was even a week ago, and I appreciate the information that's come forward on it.
Okay. Larry?
Real quick, Eric, if you could, last week I asked that these drawings be put on the web. Can you give our viewers who are watching a quick way that they can see those on the web?
If you follow the city's link to www.okc.gov, they can be found under the Project 180 link that's on the left side of the page.
Under the Project 180 link on the left side of the page when you go to www.okc.gov.
Yes.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right. Any other comments or questions? We have a couple of people that have signed up to speak. All right. Sandy Myers? She's been here all morning. All right. Harry Wilson? Okay.
I'm here to represent the South Side.
About time you showed up, Harry. About 40 years late.
Harry Wilson, 1520 Southwest 71st Street. I have a lot of ideas that have already been reviewed that I recognize, so I'm not going to go through all the things I plan to say, but what I did plan to say was about the history of this area, the Music Hall, City Hall, the Oklahoma County Courthouse. They're about all that's left of the significant historical buildings of downtown Oklahoma City. Urban renewal took care of that. This location goes back further than any other part of downtown except the Skirvin Hotel. This is the heart of our city. Therefore, in my opinion, it should be treated that way. The city fathers wisely told the railroad to move further south, and the building and others west and east of here were built by the WPA in the early 30s. They've been here at this location for the past 80 years almost. Anything done in the city's Bicentennial Park should be related to that history. There are statues that relate to our history, and there could be more if all the historical artifacts of our city's history were gathered here, as Pete said. An outdoor display of our history, bookended by these most historical buildings, could be a wonderful outdoor display of our history. My main idea is a statue that would be a great addition to this park and to our city, and that is the 89er statue given to the people of Oklahoma City in 1960 by one of our great men in the history of our city, B.D. Eddy. I've talked to Clay Farha, his grandson, and he agrees that it's in the wrong place now. It's in an alley, and nobody ever sees it, but everybody would see it, especially our visitors to our city and our own citizens, and it would remind them that that statue commemorates the people who founded this city in 1889. It's the 89er statue. What better place for it to be than in this great new park, and there are some wonderful places in the park. just east of the fountain or on one of the plazas or the other. It would be a fantastic addition to our city and to this park if it was lighted, landscaped, and made to be the centerpiece of this park. And it should be, because it relates our history and how our city was started. Next stop is the Art Commission in Wendell, Wisnat. Thanks for your time.
Sandy Myers, 1603 Drury Lane, here in Oklahoma City or Nichols Hills. Mayor Cornett and council members, thank you for letting me address you. I have 2 points that I would like to emphasize. The first one is the length of time that this plot of land has been discussed, and secondly, the people that have been involved in looking at this property. The Alliance for Cultural Facilities was formed in 1989 by me and Joe Carroll Cameron. The purpose was the improvement of cultural facilities in downtown Oklahoma City. Information from this fed into Mayor Norick's Cultural Task Force that then fed into the formation of maps as constructed by Rick Harrow, who was hired by our Chamber of Commerce. A part of the proposal was restructuring of what is now known as Bicentennial Plaza. I want to summarize the first point, and the timetable was 1989, Alliance for Cultural Facilities, a committee of 120 people from South Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, North Oklahoma, East and West, specifically diversified selection. In 2002, the redesigning or improvement of the park was handed to leadership of Oklahoma City at their request. 2009, my husband Stuart and I were asked once again to look into the funding for this park renovation. In the late 2009, the plans for Devon Tower and renovation of downtown Oklahoma City were revealed, and a committee headed by Rand Elliott was formed to look into the design of Bicentennial Plaza once again. Second point, the people involved, as I did allude to earlier. The committee in late 2009, that's recently, included Kathy O'Connor, Russell Klaus, Larry Ogle, Mike Clark, Laura Story, Andre French, Roy Williams, and Jane Jenkins. There were adjacent arts groups to this property that were also included. Glenn Gentile, who is the head of the Museum of Art, Jim Brown, the manager of Civic Center, Beth Short, head of Leadership Oklahoma City. There were private citizens included: Sandy Myers, Terry Cooper, Carol Troy, Alan Payne. As was stated earlier, there were 9 meetings over approximately 8 to 9 months. There were 4 concepts developed and presented. There were 5 proposals presented. My conclusion: the decision of redevelopment of this park has been over 23 years of preparation and discussion with public and private citizens from all walks of life. Hundreds of people have been involved. It is time to make the park a spectacular centerpiece for the cultural area of downtown Oklahoma City, which to me and hundreds of other people is very, very important. Thank you for your time.
Coming down.
Mayor, I just want to.
Yes, thank you.
I had the opportunity to work with Sandy Myers when we redid the Civic Center renovation back in the late 1900s. No, it was late 1900s.
Yeah.
It was the late 1900s. It was late 1900s, early 21st century here. Yeah, now I'm off track. But she was very passionate about the Civic Center at that point in time. It put her heart and soul in the meetings that we had with her on that. And I think most of you will realize that the Civic Center really turned out to be the renovation turned out to be a great, great facility. And she was very involved with that at that point in time. And she hasn't lost her passion for the building and the grounds.
All right. Yeah, David?
If it's okay, I do have just a couple of comments to make, mainly from comments I've received from citizens, especially from Ward 5. And I think everyone, even members of the council, even though we may not necessarily demonstrate it, share the same concerns that have been brought out in emails and phone calls, that we do maintain the historic status of these buildings. And I think the design helps bring or pull the two buildings, the Civic Center, Music Hall, as well as City Hall, together through the design. So I think that's important. I like Mr. Wilson's recommendation about bringing over the 89er statue, if not in the Civic Center Park, then hopefully at least on City Hall's property in this area somehow, because I do think it's a tremendous statute and we need to give it the proper recognition. But we have listened to our citizens' comments. I think everybody shares the same concern about preserving trees whenever possible, but sometimes that's not always possible. So, but I do think everyone has the same concerns, and I'm not disagreeing with Councilman White, but I think it was helpful to show pictures of the park as it currently exists to help reflect the improvements that I think this design will lead to. It's not a very inviting park as it is, and I am by it 6 days a week between now and April 15th, 7 days a week, and it is not an inviting park, the way it's designed. I'm looking forward to being able to have my lunch. We've got 25 park benches proposed with these new designs. Granted, it'd be nice to retain some of those trees, but again, it's been presented that that's not possible. I think it's going to be more open, more inviting, and better used. It is not used right now. No one uses it. I'll use it as often as I can, if nothing else, just to have lunch or to walk over there for a break on occasions. Anyway, I don't mean to ramble. But one of the points as far as diversification on these committees, and I think Councilman White's point is well taken, but I would include someone who's at least 60 years old. I was going to say 55, but I'm 57, and sometimes I don't think I'm old enough to serve, because I think it's important to have people who grew up here in the city, maybe in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s, certainly, to be a part of this process. So not just where they currently live now, but whether or not they grew up in the city and have that perspective, or in lieu of that, have Bob Blackburn serve on all of these committees to bring that historic perspective. Now, Bob may not want to agree to that. And the other point is, when citizens are asked to participate on these committees, they really need to consider agreeing to that, because it's so frustrating trying to find that diverse membership on these committees and then have several people just decline the opportunity. Sure, it takes time and effort, but I know, like Mr. Wilson, would certainly put forth the time and effort to participate in that. So, would I propose the design as it currently is presented? I might make a few changes, but I don't know if that's our call necessarily. But I am excited about the future of this park, and I just wanted to make everyone, at least from Ward 5, realize that we have a lot of the same concerns that have been presented to me, and we are trying to address those the best we can. Thank you.
All right. Pat?
Just a brief comment, Your Honor. I was one of the councilmen who got a lot of calls about the trees. And I had a lady set me straight the other night. She said trees are like people. They get old and they die. And so it's not inappropriate to take trees out as they get old. They lose their shapes. They lose their health that way. So I was straightening out that area. And I'll admit I was an opponent to the park project early on. Some of the preliminary drawings I thought were not appropriate for that area, but I think the people who have done the work now have come up with a good design, and I wholeheartedly support what they've done.
Yeah. I'm excited about the improvements. Look forward to the completion. So good luck to both of you. Any other comments or questions on this item? All right. Thank you, guys.